A big welcome to you all, and thank you very, very much for coming here today, gathering here today to be our audience for what's going to be a super session. No alternative facts here, just pure data-driven decision making. And we have a wonderful guest, an agile analytics leader. You can't go anywhere without hearing about agile nowadays. So I'm very excited to maybe learn a bit myself. We have a room full of IT professionals, management professionals, prospective students and students alike. So we hope to give a bumper, informative session with our wonderful guest, Mr. Chris Scandlen. I'm Joseph O'Brien. I'll be your moderator for today, and I'm an MBA student in Module 8, Entrepreneurship in Emerging Markets. So without any further ado, let's meet our wonderful guest, Mr. Chris Scandlen. Hello, Chris. Welcome here today.
Thank you, Joe. It's a privilege and honor to be able to participate in this webinar. Thank you so much for coordinating this and for inviting me to share my experience and my passion for using analytics to improve how organizations make decisions and to make an impact in society.
Well, yes, I mean, there's so many routes that you can go to when you're analyzing your data, and it has such far-reaching implications to the benefits of that. Just before we go in, we're going to cover some house rules. So what we've done is we've asked Chris, as an analytics leader, a few questions surrounding data-driven decision makings. Some of them diving a bit deeper, some of them looking at what really is big data analytics for those of us that aren't au fait with the subject. Chris has returned some of those answers to us, and we're going to look at his answers, and he'll elaborate upon those within the webinar. Now, this is a Q&A session webinar, so that means in about half an hour, 40 minutes time, we'll be opening up the lines, so to speak, for a Q&A session. So what that means is you'll see a little box there that you could type in any question. So you'll get out of this session what you put into this session. So if you hear anything, or there's anything that's interesting to you, how do I implement this in my region, in my area, in my industry, what are the challenges for this, etc., etc., then write them down, and I will look to get those to Chris at around the 45-minute mark. First of all, Chris, I'd just like you just to outline a bit to our audience today, a bit about where you're based now and a bit about your background in analytics.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. As Joe said, I'm Chris Scandlen. I work out of Baltimore, Maryland in the United States, and I've been an analytics practitioner for more than 15 years now. My undergraduate degree was in mathematics and economics, and then I've done graduate study in economics as well as operations research. My first job out of graduate school was with a boutique consulting firm where I did some software development as well as economics consulting. Then I moved into the internet industry. So I worked for an internet product company for a couple of years, returned back to consulting with a Big Four organization, and then moved into the education industry. And I've been working in the education industry now for many years. Couldn't be happier. The one thing in common throughout my professional career is that I've been able to help organizations make better decisions by looking at data, understanding what's working and what's not working, and making recommendations. So even though I've touched many different industries, the common thread throughout my professional career has been in analytics.
Economics first, then analytics. So you don't do anything by half. No, you're not off doing anything overly creative there. Some very, very hard work to get to where you are. And so from your professional opinion, I'm going to start with our first question for you today then. What does data-driven decision making mean to you, Chris, as a business professional?
I think there are a couple of components of it. First, it's the ability to be able to understand what's working in your organization, and then to continue to do the things that's working or take corrective action to improve the things that aren't working. And what's key to this is to be able to build in a culture of measurement into an organization. So this means set up performance measures that allow you to understand what's working, and then to be able to try new things out through experimentation. And when you try new things out, you can then use those performance measures to figure out if what you've tried out is something that you should continue doing or if you should try something else out. So it's setting up metrics, being able to experiment, not being able to try new things out, and then using those metrics to figure out what's working and what's not working.
No, I definitely like that idea of experimentation. Certainly from my perspective, when I think of analytics, I don't think of experimentation. How much of that is part of your job as a data analyst, looking at, laterally at different ways to solve problems?
I think it's really important to have an open mind when you approach a business problem. So either by bringing in different methodologies or data sets that you've used in the past, maybe addressing a question that's not directly related to the business problem at hand, or also being open-minded in the sense of working with your business partner and getting their thoughts about ways to approach the problem. So so it's really important to bring in past experience, to also bring in what you know is being done outside of your industry, but also to have that collaborative discussion with your business partners, because all of this together feeds into the approach that you choose and the data that you choose to answer the business problem at hand.
Okay, so let's get to the core root of what is big data analytics. So I'll ask you that basic question so that we can kind of get a foundation here. So what is it? What is big data analytics? Can you please go through it, Chris?
Sure. I like separating this out into two parts. So one is the big data part, and the second is the analytics part. So big data, it describes the type of data that's being collected or used in analysis. And typically you would think about big data in terms of how much data you're collecting. So for example, if you're collecting data about what your customers are doing on your website, then you might have millions of visits to your website a day, and that's a lot of data. So that's related to volume. And then it also reflects that some of the data you capture might not be structured in really organized ways. So for example, if you're looking at comments on a video that you post, so the comments are free text and not structured. And then the third piece of this is that also you could have data that's generated very frequently. So going back to the notion of data that you capture when someone visits your websites, you could get not only a lot of visitors, but you could get visitors that are coming very often. So those three things together make up big data sets. And then the question becomes, okay, what do you do if you have all of these data that you want to make sense of? And analytics relates to the tools and methodologies that you can use to make sense of the data. So putting it together, big data analytics, it's the tools and methodologies that you use to make sense of the data. And when you think about big data in particular, there are specific ways that you want to process all of this data. So you want to distribute some of the processing, and then you want to break down the tasks that you're using to process the data. So there are specific techniques and tools that you can use for that.
Okay, and so I'll have some questions to ask you later about what narratives we're looking for when we look at data and whether you have those in mind up front.
Absolutely.
So we'll talk about that later. I'm always looking to see if I can find a story in the data. I think that's quite interesting as well. In terms of that, then, Chris, how do you think analytics then help businesses achieve their goals?
I think there are two ways that this happens. So one is is to be able to understand what is currently happening, to understand what are your customers buying, for example.
Hmm.
But the area where you're really providing value through analytics to an organization is by helping organizations anticipate what's going to happen in the future. And that's so important because it allows it allows organizations to do a couple of things. If you can and anticipate future behavior, then organizations can forecast what they think certain outcomes are going to be, whether it's their total number of customers or total revenue. And based on those forecasts, then they can make adjustments to their strategies. The other area where anticipating future outcomes is really, really important is to be able to understand for an individual customer or for an individual that you're interacting with through your organization is what you think the future behavior of that individual is going to be, because then you can adjust the way that you're speaking to your customer or the products that you're giving your customer based on what you think is going to happen to the customer. So you can intervene to impact that anticipated behavior. So for example, if you have a customer and you know certain things about your customer, and in the past other customers have purchased certain types of products, then you can offer a product that customers have purchased in the past to this one. So you have being able to anticipate these future outcomes more broadly for an organization, so at some aggregate level, but then you have being able to predict what any individual that's interacting with your organization is going to do. And those predictions are really, really powerful because they can
Yes.
be used then to adjust how you're working with them.
I like it because it touches upon some of the stuff we learned on the MBA, a service dominant logic, looking at how we can create value in every exchange. And so let's say this, for example, I couldn't help but think of Black Monday when everyone goes onto Amazon, for example, and buys TVs. And so Amazon
Right.
can tell how many TVs we bought, what types of TVs we bought. If we register on their website, they can tell us a bit about what we bought in the past. And then that means when Black
Exactly.
Monday comes up next year, Chris, I assume that they're going to offer me exactly what I want, and I'm going to be surprised when I go on Amazon and I see the TV of my dreams turn up, but in fact it's all
Exactly.
big data analytics.
Exactly. So Joe, next time, so when you log in next year, suppose this past Black Monday
Hmm.
you purchased a TV, but also when you were browsing you saw a really nice shirt and you bought that at the same
Mm.
time. Then maybe next year when you log in on Black Monday, you'll purchase another TV, but in the recommendation bar they'll also say, "Hey Joe, did you check out these other five shirts that you might like?" So even though the products don't seem really related, they've seen that you purchased something in the past, so they'll
Okay,
recommend
so it
it to you.
creeps into upstream marketing as well, and consumer generated, products as well. So in terms of industry, it seems to be quite, wide-reaching, the implications, Chris. What industries do you see benefiting from the use of analytics?
I think that it can impact organizations or industries across the board. So Joel, let me ask you something. So on your way to work this morning, how did you get to work?
Well, it's snowing here in Amsterdam, so I couldn't
Yeah.
take my bike, and I had to take the metro or the tube or the subway, depending on where you're from, the underground.
Okay. And And for the metro, how long was your wait? Did you have to wait?
I had to wait for
For,
10 minutes. I had to wait in the cold.
okay, okay. Well, transportation systems, so whether it's a metro or bus, analytics is driving or can drive the scheduling of either trains or buses. So what 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 you could use analytics for in this example is you want to figure out at different stations how typically for a given time period how many riders are going to be at each station. So you can forecast the number of riders
Mm.
at a given stop. And then based on that forecast, you would want to figure out how often do you want trains or buses to go to different stops. And then you want to figure out what is the best routing to take. So should this bus go from stop A to stop B or stop A to stop C, given your forecast of number of riders, because you want to minimize the wait time for
Wow.
for riders, given that you only have a fixed number of buses or metros. So that's one example of an industry analytics can be used for. But let me ask you one more thing, Joe. So did you did you stop into a coffee shop, say a coffee shop chain on your way to work?
Not today, but I frequently do.
Okay, so here's another example. So the coffee shop chain that maybe you you stop into on your way to work,
Yes.
analytics is playing a couple big roles there. So one is it's helping them figure out where they should open their next location of the chain. So
Mm.
so what what you could do is you take a look at all of your different locations and find the ones that are generating the most revenue or the most purchases. And then you look at the population around that area and you find other areas that have a similar makeup of that population, and then that's where you you locate your chain. So two
Wow.
examples, two industries that are related to your everyday morning commute.
Exactly. I have two jobs to get done on my way to work, as Clay Christensen said. One is the transport, one is something to keep me awake on my way to work. And both those jobs to get done are driven by companies understanding my personality based on data points, which
That's
is
right.
is quite mind-blowing when you think about it. You go down the rabbit hole, it never ends. So could you tell us then about companies where you think, some good examples where you think use of big data has really made, an exponential impact on the company's performance, where the company is almost driven solely by big data in their analysis?
hmm I think the examples that come immediately to mind are internet product companies,
Hmm.
whether it's your big ones or smaller ones. And there are three areas where that internet product companies do analytics really well or use it for. So one is to be able to introduce data products into their into their product offering. So whether it's a data product that recommends certain things to buy or recommends friends to connect with. That's all driven by analytics. The second is to understand what are the data products they should recommend, or what is the design of of their digital experience. And for that, they they are able to, at a very large scale, test different things in the digital experience, and then to choose the digital experience that gives them that leads to the outcome that they want. And then third is that they're able to use analytics to help to monetize the users of their internet product. So for example, they're able to offer marketing departments a way to find other individuals that are using their internet product that looks like their current customers. And it's really fascinating. So I'm constantly looking to improve my own understanding of analytics, especially now in an age where new tools and methodologies are being introduced so quickly. And one of my favorite things to do, my bedtime reading, is to read engineering blogs of these internet product companies. And it's great because they're really open about some of the work that they're doing, and it's just fascinating at how they scale things. So tonight, Joe, I'll send you some links of engineering blogs, and go ahead and give them a read. Hopefully, they don't put you to sleep really quickly.
Well, I do have a 9-month-old boy who might appreciate the dulcet tones of me reading an engineering blog to them. But that's great as well, especially for those of us that are on the call that aren't big data experts or aren't IT experts. There's no running away from this, guys. If you're managing, you're working in business, there is no running away from doing your cost-benefit analysis using a data-driven system. There is no other way. If you want to have competitive advantage, is that something we're going to discuss soon, then it's very, very hard to look past doing things this way. Now, what do you see as a big growth area in terms of a growth industry for analytics on the horizon, Chris?
I think that there is a lot of opportunity in healthcare and health services for analytics. So just imagine if analytics complements the prescriptions that your medical practitioner provides. So based on your previous visits and previous doctor's notes, as well as your symptoms and some of these external symptoms from other patients, that algorithms are able to suggest what might be wrong, or the type of ailment that you have, and then doctors can use that machine-driven suggestion based on their own experience to maybe come up with better treatment plans. So I think that's one. The healthcare industry is one that's ripe for being able to use analytics to improve decision making. And then, of course, the industry that I'm in, education, there's so much opportunity for being able to improve student outcomes, as well as when you improve student outcomes, you're improving the societies they live in through analytics. So a lot of opportunity there, and we've used analytics in the past, and we will continue to do so to help students succeed within education.
Now, I was speaking to a public health student who is also a technologist, but decided to go into public health because he felt that there's a lot of fintech and financial tech, but there's not a lot of health tech. All the experts go into the big money industries, and that leaves the health industry the last in line to get all the tech. And what he was doing, developing a mobile app that would tell doctors on the fly where Ebola cases were. And that led from a 85% understanding of who had Ebola in the region to 100% understanding who had Ebola in the region, purely based on data analytics. And it combined what you said, the health and the education at the same time in terms of advocacy work. So there really is such a massive opportunity to get into, and I don't think we're even halfway there.
Yeah, and in health, I think there's a lot of opportunity to also democratize healthcare. So individuals who don't have access to healthcare, you could imagine some type of virtual health practitioner or assistant, where you're able to interact with them. You communicate you communicate some of your symptoms to it, and then this virtual assistant, based on again historical cases, can suggest some things to do so that you can either take preventative action, or you can treat treat yourself. And this could all be driven by by analytics, because what you're doing is you're using historical data on symptoms as well as outcomes, and then getting new information from someone through their interaction with, say, a virtual assistant, and providing recommendations to them.
Pretty cool. So our next question, any fans of Michael Porter? Impossible not to do a master's and not come across Michael Porter. Discussed the idea of competitive advantage and sustainable competitive advantage. Last year, McCarthy came in and said, well, there's no such thing as competitive advantage. It's all transient advantage. So you take your moment for as long as you can take it in the sun, and then you have to go back to the drawing board in order to get back your position after all the second movers come in. I'm sure you'll be more than aware of this in a fast-growing education industry. Now, do you think, Chris, that big data analytics can actually drive this transient advantage, and if so, how?
Yeah, getting analytics right can totally provide an advantage, and the companies that get analytics right are the companies that use it to anticipate future outcomes. Whether it's at their organization level at a whole, so to be able to forecast where they think their organization is going to go, or for their individual level customers, because that anticipation of future outcomes just allows you to do so much, especially at the individual level customer for the individual customer, because you can predict any behavior of any of your customers and then take actions based on that prediction to drive the behavior that would benefit your organization.
Okay, so we say here the biggest competitive advantage analytics provides, they're helping organizations anticipate future outcomes. So it's kind of the Nostradamus effect, where we can say, well, you did this in the past, so we think the trends are going like this. And then tomorrow we think everyone's going to start eating this, buying this, consuming this, and so we're going to start making this, essentially. Now let's have a look at some challenges. I think it's always important to look at some of the obstacles and how we overcome that. What do you see as the main challenges for organizations hungry to implement these big data analytic initiatives, and what are the kind of pitfalls that they should look out for, and how do they get around them?
The most important is talent, and I think this might resonate with the folks who are listening in on this call. There's a shortage of analytics practitioners. So if you're able to get trained and to start practicing analytics, you'll always be in demand. The challenge for organizations is to be able to find those individuals and to provide them with careers that they find fulfilling, and that means careers where they feel that they're able to master analytics, that they feel that what they're doing is related to some sense of larger purpose to an organization, and then also to be able to provide them with autonomy to try out new things.
Okay, and the second problem you mentioned here was organizational challenges. Can you just describe those?
And so when I started working in analytics, I think this was more prevalent than now. When I started working, a lot of times you had to convince business partners of the value of analytics. So to build that culture, that analytical culture, and the way that I typically did that in the past was to show value through some shorter term initiatives. But I think now because there's so much about analytics in the press or publicly accessible articles that the cultural piece is less important now. So most people see the value of analytics.
Yes, I mean, certainly I think we're all au fait with how now every one of us is trackable through our actions, for example, on the internet. All our shopping habits are trackable, and every single company is targeting us. Every time I go online, every advert I see is for something that I've either looked at before or I'm interested in. It kind of gives you the idea that people are paying attention. Now, this brings us to really the big punchline of this webinar, really. You know, there's a shortage of analytics experts. There's a shortage of people who don't have the skills for big data, and a big demand for companies to install data-driven analytics systems. So let's look at our programs, and how do our fantastic programs here at University of Liverpool Online equip our IT and our industry professionals who are looking to make those data-driven decisions?
Mm-hmm. For my for my understanding of the big data in analytics program is that what is really fantastic about the way that this has been designed for University of Liverpool Online is it's very practically oriented, and this means that students who are studying in these courses, they're going to be able to create their own portfolio. So Joe, in the beginning of the webinar, you made a comment about designing or being designed or in art, being involved in art, and you have students who are art students or design students. They're able to create a portfolio of say their art. Well, you know, in software engineering or analytics, it's really no different. You should be able to create a portfolio of the work you've done. And now, and with the technology nowadays, it's very easy to put the software code that you've written in a repository in the cloud and make that software code and results from that code accessible to potential employers. And the University of Liverpool Online Analytics program is going to allow students to create that code portfolio, which is really powerful. Just as an aside, when I hire now, the majority of the resumes I see have a link to their code portfolio. So typically individuals put their code on GitHub. So there's a link to their GitHub folder, and then I can go in and see and take a look at their code.
Okay. Well, you can't be more exposed than when Chris Scandlen is looking at all of your code and ascertaining whether you're a good developer or coder, or whether you understand big data. And you know, let's hammer that point home a bit more, because that's a very interesting proposition, Chris. You know, for the MBA, we have to develop a personal development plan where we kind of talk about our goals, our objectives. You know, that's something that's important that brings us through the course. On our computing courses, our new computing courses that are launching, you know, covering things from, data security to big data, web data analytics, Internet of Things, and all these new and exciting things. Our students will, and this is, important to iterate, will have a portfolio of demonstrable workings, something they can take to an employer after they finish and say, well, this is the qualification that I got, this is the piece of paper, but what does that actually mean? Well, what I did is I took the theory and I applied it here doing this, and so that's very tangible, and I think nowadays it's the minimum that we need nowadays, actually, for us.
Exactly, and the way that that programs should be designed to allow that to happen is you teach theory. So you teach some of the theory of methodologies, and you also teach the tools, so maybe programming languages or different software applications. But then you devote portions of your programs into applying those in case studies. So you have these lab components, and the University of Liverpool Online Big Data Analytics program does that, just that. So it teaches you tools and methodologies, but then there are these lab components where it's allowing you to apply what you've learned to practical examples, and you're generating then things that you can put in your code
Hmm.
portfolio. So it makes it much more tangible to a potential employer.
I'm going to patent Codefolio. I think we can.
Very nice, very nice.
Codefolio, yeah, so codefolio.com. Now, we're reaching the 35-minute mark. Means we have a lovely opportunity to quickly go over a case study with Chris, where we look at some of the work that he's done or seen in the past, and how that's relevant to our conversation today. And then in 5-10 minutes time, we open it up for Q&A. I can see we're getting loads of questions in. It's not
Excellent.
too late at all to submit your questions to Chris. So
Yes.
go into that chat box and start typing away. And what we'll do is we'll take your data and we'll figure out a bit more about who you are. We'll analyze that in order to come to
That's
some
right.
business outcomes. So let's have a look at a case study. Chris, can you give us an idea of how we can look at this in practical application?
Yes, absolutely. And Joe, I'm going to take a little bit of a different angle, and we'll do this real time. So,
Okay.
so, uh, so my understanding is that these webinars are posted, or some of them are posted on YouTube once they're done.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So,
Tomorrow.
let's imagine that what's most important for you is that these webinars generate positive buzz. So you post them on YouTube, and you want them to generate positive buzz. So that's your measure. That's your measure of success. So first, so what we're going to figure out in the next couple of minutes is how can we use analytics to help you figure out what are the types of webinars that once you post on YouTube get the most positive buzz. Does that sound good?
Okay. It sounds very good.
Okay. So let's
This
think about.
webinar's now going to be going on for 2-3 hours.
So first let's think about some of the data that we can collect off of YouTube to create a measure of that positive buzz. So I see two things. So one is we can look at the likes, and then second is we can look at the sentiment of the comments. So what we'll do is we'll take the likes, but we don't just want to look at the total number of likes, but you want to look at the percent of good likes out of all comments, because there could be some videos that don't get too many likes, but most of them are good, and some others get a lot of likes, but a good proportion of them are also dislikes. So you want to measure a proportion of likes, and then you also want to measure of a total number of responses. And then finally, we can calculate the, say, share of comments that have a positive sentiment, because what we can do is we can look at all of the text in the comment, and we can create algorithms that pick out certain keywords within the text, and we say, if you fit into these keywords, then let's give it some number. So say all these keywords that reflect some positive sentiment get a number 1. These other keywords, which are more neutral, get 0. And then if you have these other keywords here, which is, man, this big data analytics a webinar that Chris did, I couldn't understand anything. So a keyword like couldn't, then you give it a -1. So you add up all of those numbers, and then that'll give you some sentiment score. So you look at the sentiment score across the comments. So those are so that's your outcomes. So percentage of likes, total number of likes, and say sentiment score, and then what we'll do is we'll create an index across those three. So we'll standardize them, and then let's just weight them evenly, and then that'll give us an index of grade, so some grade index. across the videos. So now the next thing is you want to be able to understand what are the types of webinars that you post, or the attributes of the webinars that are going to lead to the best grades. So let's think through that. So let's pick a couple of important factors. So maybe design of the webinar. So let's just choose different fonts. So we have different fonts. Yeah. Let's also choose the length of the webinar, and then let's choose one more. What's another factor that you think?
Well, it could be type of guest or type of question. It could be industry guest, faculty guest, or student guest.
Okay, good. So we have those three things. So so we have the font that you're using in the webinar, the length of time, and then a category of guests. So what we can do is, for all of the webinars that you've used in the past, we can create this grade that we just talked about, and we know the length of time of the webinar, the font that you use, and the type of guest. So then what we can do is we can run statistical models that look at the impact of each of those three factors on the grade, and then and then based on that, we can figure out what is the best combination of those three factors that give the highest grade based on what we've seen in the past. And yeah, then we can do that to use for a couple of things. One is, if you create a webinar in the future, if for some reason you're tied to a certain type of font or guest, then you get a sense, or you can anticipate what the grade of that webinar is going to be. And or second is now, based on that historical analysis, what font you should be using, or what type of guest, and the length of time of a webinar.
I mean, the analytics leaders will rule the world. This is really, and yes, we could go on. I can check. I can look at this webinar we have today. Our guests have to fill out a survey. I really hope you fill out our survey today and you ask questions. The survey helps future people who come to these events, and helps the data that you're giving us includes questions like, what would you like to see next time? And so we're very divisive. So that historical data is used directly, as Chris says, to predict future events that we're going to have. If you say, I like big data, but I'd like to move into data security, then we would consider that. If the whole lot of you kept on saying data security, then within the few months, you would find there would be a webinar on data security. And so that's a really lovely way to look at it. And certainly, Chris, I think offline we'll need to do a bit more work together so I can maximize the impact of our events across all channels. Now, questions, lovely questions. We have so many questions. We have people here.
Excellent.
The Zaire, we have people in management, people in IT, the whole gamut here. So let's try to go through some of their questions.
Do you have the geography that these questions are coming from? I'm a curious guy, and I'm always
not every time. I'll call it out when I see it. Sometimes from the name we can hazard a guess, but we don't want to be assuming about anything. So a question from Jacko from the floor. How do I use data in a manufacturing environment, as customers' requirements change from month to month, but the product profile doesn't? Maybe
let me address it in a couple ways. So analytics can be used in your traditional manufacturing to help to do a couple of things. So one is to optimize your manufacturing process. So even to the extent of where you put certain machines on your manufacturing floor, how often you feed the different parts of the machines to address manufacturing process. So that's one thing, is to optimize the design of your factory floor. And then a second way can be used to help with manufacturing is around inventory demand. So you can forecast demand for your manufactured product, and if you're able to anticipate demand for your manufactured product well, then you can figure out what are the raw materials, how much raw materials do I need at certain times of the year, because you could see that your demand is seasonal. So going back to what we talked about in the webinar, that being able to anticipate future outcomes is just so key, because otherwise you might be holding some raw material and that raw material goes bad and you lose money.
I mean, my last role was for a large life sciences chemical company where I ran a team of order processors, and certainly
Yep.
this is a methodology that was used to predict whether companies like Pfizer, Bayer, and the medication companies, when they would need their chemicals, what time of the
Exactly.
year for production, and every day their chemicals didn't arrive would cost them a massive amounts of money in lost production. So
Exactly.
without big data, they literally would go under as a business.
Mhm.
So let's have a look at some other questions that we have here. Question from Ahmed: should management rely on their teams for analytics, or should management manage the analytics themselves?
That is a great question. That's an organizational
Cool.
design question, and there are a couple of models that can be followed. So there's one which is a distributed model where you're where you're placing analytics teams in different functional units. So say a
Hmm.
marketing team has an
Hmm.
analytics group, an operations team has an analytics group. Then there's a
Hmm.
second model, which is a centralized or shared service model, where where you have a central team doing the analytics. Or a third model is a blend, is what I'll call a blend, where you have a central group doing the analytics, but the central group is very tied in to the business unit. So they're constantly interacting with business units, understanding their business problems, and recommending the type of analytic solutions that can be used to address those business problems. And I like the the blended model where you have the central group, but
Hmm.
very much steeped in the business partners' processes and problems, because that central group then can can create best practices around both data governance as well as the tools and methodologies that are being used, and then can share, can also share work across the team, so you don't have just one individual who is responsible for one type of solution, because that creates a lot of risk for the organization. So I like the central model where you're sharing work across a full team. They're also creating best practices, they're creating governance, but at the same time, they're very steeped in the business.
Well, I mean, I mean, this leads on to another interesting question, really. And certainly in the past, you talked about webinars, and we look at the data of how many webinars we do and how many people turn up, and I look for a narrative in that to inform what's happening this year, for example.
Mhm.
Once I found that narrative in that one data set, and I can draw the conclusion that people like webinars and they're increasing, and they want more subjects. Once I've drawn that conclusion, I then stop myself from pulling that report week after week after week after week to tell me the same narrative, because I'm confident that I pulled a big enough data set in the first place to tell me the narrative in order to get the budget or the plan or the approval to do what I need to do now. Now, we had another question that's come in that ties into that
Mm.
from Clay. Do you think you can then fall victim of too much data, so much so that the findings become clouded? I do find that sometimes in large organizations, there's a lot of data flying around, and without people like yourselves, I find it very hard to disseminate some of that information, actually.
Yes, yes, yes. Another great question that ties in both to your observation, Joe, and the previous question. I think I think there needs to be a balance between what I'll call democratization of analytics, which means that you do want your business partners to have the ability to do their own self-service. So, for
Hmm.
example, to be able to interact with some of your solutions, so they can understand what's happening within their unit. But at the same time, you also want enough governance in place so that that there aren't different pieces of information related to the same thing. So say customer counts, there aren't different customer counts that are floating around. So I think democratization in terms of being able to do self-service so you can quickly understand the trends for your business unit is important, but that centralized piece around data governance, as well as sometimes you need to be able to generate insights and recommendations based on much deeper analysis, especially predictive analysis. And typically you need very specialized skills that you can only gain, for example, in a program like Liverpool's big data analytics program. All of that needs to be created from a centralized or shared services group.
Thank you. Now, a question from the floor: how can traditional industries balance risks of their legacy interface and business applications and the need for modern day big data analytics? I mean, I assume lots of companies have to go through seismic systemic shifts in their software and their staffing.
So let me take that in a couple of ways. So one is is around introducing new technologies into an organization's stack, and it could be new technologies related to ways that functional groups within an organization are driving their business, like a CRM or a financial system. And it could also be an introduction of new analytics technologies into your stack. So I think both of those things, it's really, really important to always be figuring out if we need to introduce something new into our stack, whether it's your more typical back office applications or your analytics applications. And to do that, you need to be looking at the market and things that are being introduced, and you have to have an environment that allows you to prototype these new applications without impacting your existing core processes. So you could imagine yourself prototyping, researching these new things, and then when you see that it makes sense to introduce one, that's when you then enter into an initiative to bring that into your technology stack, and then there are ways during that initiative to configure the new system while you're using the old system. But also a big part of it is around business readiness. So you have to be sure that you have that while you're configuring your new system, that the individuals who are going to be using it understand what this new system looks like. So it's not just being able to configure it on the technology side, but as important, it's the ability for users of the system to know very early on, as you're configuring it, what it's going to look like and how it's going to help them.
Okay, so you mentioned the stack earlier. Now you probably have some preferences or some things that you have to use because that's what your organization has purchased. We have a request from Michael. Apologies if you've covered this, but what are some of the most popular tools that you might refer to?
So on the
Tableau, for instance.
Yeah. So let me talk about on the reporting and advanced analytics side. I'm a big fan of open source for a couple reasons. One is that it's very accessible in terms of cost, and second, because it's open source, people are constantly advancing it based on their own research. So for statistical analysis or machine learning, the two I like the most are R and Python. Now, when it comes to doing reporting, so creating dashboards, yes, you mentioned Tableau, and my teams are using Tableau and have a lot of experience in Tableau, and we've had a lot of success with that.
It's beautiful.
There's some other, there's some other dashboarding tools as well, like Qlik, QLIK, that we've had exposure to, and the list could go on and on. But for machine learning itself, I am a huge proponent and would encourage anyone who wants to get into machine learning to start using either R or Python.
Yes, Python is very big for people getting into gamification as well. Question for Adolfo: is it possible? Sorry, just bear with me. I keep on getting questions, and they keep on scrolling down because so many people are asking them. Question from Adolfo: is it possible for business practitioners, planning managers, and financial operations staff, non-IT people, to master big data business analytics methods and tools? What are the technical skills that require emphasis? What types of software tools should we use? So if I'm going to condense that question, is okay, I'm not a big data guy, but I can understand the concept of what you're talking about. What is my first step if I want to do what you're saying? If I want to really start getting some decent analytics from my webinars, my guests, and the engagement, what's my first step?
Sure. So the first step is if you're working in an organization that has analytics groups, is definitely become friends with them and make partnerships. But you can do things on your own as well, and you can watch videos online to teach yourself some of these software applications or coding languages, or you can enroll in more formal programs so that you learn some of the foundational techniques and programming languages. But because there's a lot of democratization of analytics, especially advanced analytics, that's happening through off-the-shelf solutions, you can also use those solutions to start to visualize your own data or even begin to make predictions. So there are a lot of these tools out there now that are machine learning as a service platforms that allow you to do it. So these platforms don't at all replace the need for analytics practitioners, but actually I would say that they advance analytics and analytics practitioners, because it does allow business or people who don't have that background to appreciate analytics more and make it more tangible for them. But it also allows them to ask the appropriate questions. So they see things that are going on in their data, and then that'll prompt questions.
No, I think you're right. It's a real cheat code for managers if managers can figure out how to understand reporting, analytics, and get to grips with some of those data visualization tools. It can be very, very powerful. We've had more questions than we could possibly get through today, and we're coming up to the hour mark. So I'd like to thank all of our audience for their time today, for their great questions. I had such an interesting one that I've kind of parked till the end, one that's fascinating, one that could have a webinar all to itself. We can't spend too long answering this, but let's give it a go as we end the webinar today with a lovely business venture. As an MBA student, I love business ventures. Hi, I'm joining in a few minutes late from Ottawa, Canada. I have an IT startup, lovely, and I need to conduct a pilot for a gamification strategy for energy conservation. So a bit of social entrepreneurship, bit of conscious capitalism here. Going to set up an online business, energy conservation, wants to use gamification. I need to get clearance from the Ontario Gaming Commission. All right, there you go. And Hydro Ontario, who I'm sure are in charge of some of the energy, the hydro-powered energy, I assume. Users have to sign in, it's the business model, pay a fee, and compete for the lowest energy bill. Ooh, So kind of an
Excellent.
aggregated marketplace but instead of just picking the lowest energy bill, we're kind of bidding and competing on them. Nice. What kind of data can I gather for them to entice them to allow me to pilot? So what's going to kind of intrigue the Ontario Gaming Commission and the hydropower company, the two important stakeholders to run something like this? What do you think might intrigue them?
That's a great
Wow.
question. First, hello Canada.
Alex.
How much time do I have, Joe?
I think a couple of minutes before we run
Okay, okay, okay. So one thing you might consider so what you want to do is to provide evidence to the Gaming Commission that you would be able to that you would be able to lower energy costs. I think that's important. So one thing you could do is even before going through. So I'm not sure where you are in your product development, but even before going through it, is to set up a very simple landing page that has individuals or introduces them to this concept of being able to bid and then capture the results of what that gives you. So suppose you set this up and then based on what you put on this very simple landing page, you see that individuals are bidding. What turns out through a game is that individuals are bidding a certain amount. You set up a different landing page that also describes something similar about setting your own energy costs, but you don't have that gaming portion of it. So you don't have to do much work on the gaming piece, but but for the landing page with the gaming piece, you do a little bit to give them the notion of what gamification would look like. You set up one landing page that doesn't have gamification at all, and then you compare the total energy costs that get generated through the bids for the landing page that with the game and then without the game, and hopefully you see that the total energy cost on the landing page with the game is lower than without the game, and then that's evidence that you can take to the commission.
And there you have it, in 1 or 2 minutes, being able to wade through all of that, seek potential data points, look at past data in order to inform future behavior. It's time to get your big data on. I hope to see you guys all in class. My name is Joe O'Brien. I've been your moderator for today. I'd like to thank all of you for attending. Some fantastic questions, the likes I've never seen. And thank you very much, Mr. Chris Scandlen, Agile Analytics Leader, for guiding us so lovely through this today. Thank you very much. Have a lovely evening. Make it a productive one. If you're a student listening, make sure you get to that assignment, and we'll see you the next time around. Thank you very much, and goodbye.